it's audible to all. So welcome to our third session. So hi to everyone. Nice to see you all. Again, we are moving ahead with our third session of Psychosocial Echo with allied health professionals. So today we are going to deal with the laying and foundation of good practices. We have two resource persons, that definitely our main faculty member, the all-rounder, Ms. SMRITI RANA is here. So welcome, ma'am. And we have Sana, our medical and psychiatry, Sanu, sorry. We have Sana and Sanu. Always we misspell their names. So Sanu is here, our medical and psychiatry social worker. She'll also deal with the case presentation. And few of our social workers also will join to the echo session. So welcome to all. We are moving ahead with the presentation. So this is basically a case presentation. Sanu will present the case aspects, real life situations, definitely regarding our history, genograms, eco maps, family dynamics and all. Our faculty member, SMRITI RANA, will explain how it is related to our practical experience and how we, social worker and the health professionals are dealing with these present life situations. So moving ahead with that. So SMRITI ma'am, please proceed.
Hi, hello everybody. Just before we start, Vaishnavi, I think Rebecca is having a problem with the audio.
Okay.
Yeah. So should we just wait a minute till everybody's on?
Sure, we can. Rebecca ma'am, can you hear us? You can speak. I think it's. We can hear you. Rebecca ma'am. Ma'am, I think she can hear us.
Okay, so then let's get started, I suppose. Hello, everybody. Nice to see all of you back here. And today we're going to be talking about laying foundations. I think from our experience, it has been that, we can't really proceed with interventions and with, trying to resolve a problem unless we fully understand the situation from a holistic point of view. So for us, before we rush into trying to fix various issues in palliative care, I think a complete 360 view of what the patient and the families are experiencing, that has to be a solid foundation that we start with.
Ma'am, you are muted, I think.
Yes. Yes. All right. Yeah. So I was saying that just like in medical practice, unless you take a holistic view and examine every symptom, examine every source of the illness, it would be not just wrong, but it would be unethical to prescribe medication. So similarly, in a psychosocial setting, that first assessment is very, very important. Now, what we typically do is we break it up into phases. What we're going to work with today is just phase 1, which is the basic initial assessment that we do, a thorough assessment of the family. Phase 2 and phase 3, I will tell you a little bit later about. That we get into some of the more delicate topics like, exploring intimacy issues, exploring sexuality, exploring spirituality. And those are not things that we can do right at the start. There's a deep trusting relationship that has to be built with the family, and that usually happens much later. So we're not going to be getting into that in this session. we're going to take a slightly unusual route this time. Normally we have a didactic presentation and then we have the case presentation. But in this case, the case presentation and the didactic bit will happen simultaneously. We're going to use this one case to take you through the entire process. So if we can pull that the case up on screen, please. Sanu will, well, I'll take you through the first few slides and then Sanu will explain what we explored with the family. First slide, please. So the patient, again for confidentiality, we're going to call him Mr. M, is a 59-year-old gentleman who presented with CVA, with cerebrovascular accident, and we will explain in a little more detail what that means. And currently, these are the medications he's on. Now, from a psychosocial point of view, well, we don't have much to do with the medication bit, but it's important for us to understand what those medicines are. And for those of you who attended the interdisciplinary team session, it's important for us to know what the side effects of the medicine are, what could be the possible impact on the family if they're taking these medicines, and what impact it could have on their mental health, on their sense of well-being. So those kind of things we need to know, but for the moment, I'm just going to leave that there. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, what you're seeing on your screen is a genogram. Now, I know most of you are quite familiar with the genogram and what it's for, right? A genogram is basically a diagrammatic representation of the family, and we also talk about, it also shows us who's in their life. Now, most times I've noticed that people just sort of, they put the person, the patient's spouse or immediate family, and they leave it at that. But we try and actually expand that genogram as much as possible. Now, a genogram is a really, it's a versatile tool. And, people think of it as a very basic tool, but I really think of it as something so critical, because in that one diagram, it should tell me everything I need to know, at least on the outset, about the family. Now, this, I have to warn you, is an incomplete genogram, because we've only gotten this far in getting information from the family. So if you, if I can take you through it, Mr. M is the square box with the X there, and you can see Mrs. S on the other side. And so the X marks the person who is at the center of our case at the moment. Now, what this genogram is telling you really is that Mr. M used to be married to this other lady, 43-year-old. Not the other side, yeah, 43, yeah. And not only should a genogram tell you the structure of the family and of the people in that person's life, but it should also tell you the dynamics to a large extent. And this is where you can get creative. You can come up with your own sort of, key as to how you want relationships to be shown. Now, this is a very simple one. I'm not going to go into much detail here. The family structure itself is a little bit complex. So Mr. M and Mrs. S live together. The purple circle tells you that they live together. The red line between Mr. M and his wife tells you that they are separated. Okay. The squiggly orange lines tell you that there is hostility or estrangement. Okay. So just by looking at this, and the blacked out circles and squares tell you that those people are deceased. Now, Mrs. S's husband is deceased. She had a daughter and a son with him, who are both married. Those are the ages in the squares and in the circles. And she also has grandchildren. And one of the grandchildren has also passed away. Mr. M has two daughters, and he is estranged from that whole family. Mr. M also has 5 sisters. Okay, now I haven't put too much information in there because we haven't yet got this information. As we get to know the family better, we will get more information, and we will keep on expanding this genome map. It's important for us to also know who is talking to whom, who is bonded to whom, and so on and so forth. So at the moment, we're working with the live case with you. So we know who they're hostile towards. We don't know who they're particularly close to in this. We're going to have to figure that out as we go along. Now, when I said a genogram can be creative and versatile, I meant that, for every team, whether you're in Coimbatore, whether you're in Bombay, whether you're in the north, it doesn't have to. If you go online, you'll find all kinds of different genomap symbols that you can follow. While some of the core ones are universal, how you show dynamics is entirely up to you, provided that your entire team understands it the same way. So ideally, there should have been a key at the bottom saying, squiggly orange lines means hostile, purple circle means that they live together, the blue line probably means that there is a relationship between them that is not a legitimate relationship, so to speak. So you can actually make your own kind of genogram symbols and make sure that everybody in your team is educated on what those symbols are. Okay, so this is the genogram. And ideally, then I would like to populate it with Mrs. S's parents, even if they're deceased, Mr. M's parents, Mrs. S's siblings, if she has any, and then try and explore their relationship and keep filling that in. So the genogram is not done and dusted in the beginning. Typically, when you first meet a patient, you draw a genogram and then you forget about it. But I would urge you to constantly refer back to the genogram and keep filling it up as more and more information presents itself. And that is something that over time, once you just look at it, you know exactly what you need to know about the family. Okay, next slide, please. Sanu, do you want to take us through this? Are we missing the eco map slide?
The next slide.
Okay, so we'll come back to this. Okay, so since we're here, I'll just take you through it. So Mr. M experienced sudden weakness of the right side because of this CVA. Initially, he underwent treatment in the Taluk Hospital of Palod and was later referred to the Medical College Hospital in Trivandrum. And currently, he is in Pallium India's home care program. Now, again, like I said, this is an ongoing case. As we go along, you'll understand why we have such skeletal information. Now, when we talk about illness history and experience with the healthcare system so far, what we also want to explore is how did the family navigate the healthcare system? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Were they spoken to rudely? Did they have a doctor who was kind to them? Did they have a doctor or a healthcare team that explained everything to them in terms of their diagnosis, in terms of the prognosis? What was their relationship with their carers? And it's sad, but I think most of the time what we find is that people have had a really rough time in the healthcare system. They've not been given time. They've just been sort of given procedures, medication, and so on. So typically, if you look at any of our other case histories, you'll find that it hasn't been a very pleasant experience for them. But in this illness history, I will also ask you to get their subjective perspective. How do they feel going through it? Now that they have come into your care, how do they feel about that? So explore the subjectivity of it as well when you're taking an illness history and how they have navigated the healthcare system. Next slide, please. Okay. This is what we call an eco map. This is the lesser known cousin of the genogram. And again, a very versatile tool, which I will ask you to do some research also on your own. We will be giving you some material on what to look up. And so this is a very basic one. Now, unlike a genogram, what the eco map does is it tells you about the relationship of the patient and the caregiver to the rest of the world. So it could be their neighbors, like you can see. It could be their church. It could be their friends. It could be their sports buddies. It could be someone that they meet once a week for an art class. So now in this case, because we're just looking at this family, if you look on the top right corner, you'll find that there's a key. Okay, one line is harmony, 2 lines is a strong bond, and a dotted line or a fragmented line is conflict. So here, just looking at this eco map, you know that the patient does not really get along with the neighbors or the panchayat officials. There is some conflict happening there. Religion is something that's important to him. His siblings have a positive relationship with him, and he is most bonded to his partner, that is Mrs. S. I would also add, going along as we get more information about the family, we will also be adding things like, we should actually have added the volunteers from Pallium India, We should have added the home care team, because they have a positive relationship with us. And we actually now form a part of their world. So you can add as many people to the eco-map as possible. Anybody who has an influence on the well-being or the lack of well-being that a family is experiencing can be added to the eco-map. And this is also a diagram that you can populate as in every time that you go and visit them and you find out a little bit more information about them. Okay, next slide, please. So Sanu, I'm going to let you take over from here, and then I will be interjecting with various observations and comments as we go.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So hi, everyone. I'm Sanu, and I work in Palim India as medical social worker. Ma'am, shall I say regarding the medications? Just mention. Okay. So as we know, this patient, he's aged 59, diagnosed with a cerebrovascular accident, and he takes medications such as Losar, which is actually for controlling the blood pressure, and Atorva for cholesterol, Randac for gastritis, Dianine for controlling blood sugar, and Carbamazepine for seizures. So the clinical diagnosis is cerebrovascular accident, and it actually represents another term for stroke. As we know, stroke, it is when we lack blood flow through some parts of the brain due to some blockage that results in stroke. And the possible causes could be high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and smoking. Among this, the patient has got blood pressure, cholesterol, and diabetes. And regarding the family history, Mr. M, he's separated from his wife, and currently he lives with Mrs. S, who's a widow, and they are not legally married. So Mr. M, he hasn't legally divorced with his wife, who's a government employee, and he also doesn't have any relationship with the wife and children since 10 years. And he doesn't even know if they are married or not. And he doesn't want to disclose any information regarding that. So Mr. M, he was a central government employee who used to earn minimum of rupees 40,000 per month. Later, he had to resign in order to look after his siblings, who all were women and unmarried. So his wife and children during that time, they couldn't accept it since he was resigning. And once all his siblings got settled, he migrated to Dubai for work, and then which also helped him to support his family in terms of financial. And then when he returned, he found that all the money that has been deposited in the bank, it was being withdrawn by his wife and children, and they also abandoned him, claiming the property which he had constructed a new house. All those ownership was being transferred in the name of wife and his children. And the property in which Mr. M and Mrs. S now lives belongs to Mrs. S' oldest son, who lives in Dubai. And to talk about the family dynamics regarding cohesion, there is strong bond between Mr. M and Mrs. S, and there is no cohesion between the rest of the family members. And the communication also happens only between Mr. M and Mrs. S. Roles are like they were having a reciprocal caregiving relationship, but since since she is becoming she has got increasing forgetfulness, that is for Mrs. S. Mr. M is afraid to leave her alone. So currently, the primary decision maker is Mr. M, and the adaptability is also low. Regarding the social challenges, these couples, they do not have any social support because Mrs. M, the community considers Mrs. M to have an immoral background. So they lack social support because the rest of the community members, they isolate them. And there is an ongoing conflict happening between the panchayat officials and the patient, because they wanted to construct a public road for which pretty much of the patient's property would be hacked for that. So rivalries are happening, and therefore Panchayat also hesitate to support them. And regarding the current social supports available, Mr. M's siblings occasionally help out financially with small amounts. That also not regularly, it happens occasionally. And they receive food kit from Talim India and also free medicines. And we also have trained volunteers from Talim India in order to look after their they does regular follow-ups on a regular basis, and they also motivates them and also reach out if they want any help. These couples, they belong to very poor economic status. As we know, the current income is only the widow's pension. Ma'am, you want to tell something?
No, carry on.
Okay. They have loans because they have borrowed a lot of money from neighbors, friends, and all for this treatment purpose, and they are not willing to reveal how much amount it is. So the current income is only the widow's pension, and Palim India do support with food kit and free medicines. The educational status of children, they do not have any children. Job status of the family members are like they are currently unemployed. The patient's insight on diagnosis is that Mr. M, he understands what the current diagnosis is and all its implications. And the patient's prognosis is like he understands the importance of physiotherapy, and he also does frequently exercises and also has got compliance to medications. Whereas regarding the insight of the caregiver regarding the diagnosis and prognosis of the patient, Mrs. S, she's aware of the medical condition and its implications, but then what happens is that she has got increasing forgetfulness, and therefore she herself is not able to manage, the patient's needs, and the patient is also concerned regarding that. We could take the mental status examination of the patient, and what we find is that the attitude of the patient is like he seems to be attentive, cooperative, except in revealing the details regarding his ex-wife and family members. And the general appearance and facial expressions, it seems to be like he has got very neat dressing, hygienes, he maintains hygienes, eye contact, and facial expression do changes according to the subject. And regarding the posture, he was very much relaxed. And the psychomotor activities like catatonic activities are very regular, it's relaxed, no tremors. Voice and speech is like the intensity is very strong, spontaneity is also strong and reliable. Mood and affect, there are appropriate emotional, and when he talks about the financial constraints, he seems to be very emotional. Regarding the perception, no perception related issues. I mean, there are no hallucinations, delusions, etc. And the thinking pattern is like there are no obsessions and delusional problems. And he doesn't have any kind of social judgmental issues, and his insight is also like very normal. And cognition is also, he has got orientation regarding time, place, and person, and he's also conscious.
Smriti ma'am, yeah, I think we need to have more explanations regarding the slides as well as yes. So please.
Okay, so let's go with this family history first. Now, there's a lot of information on these slides, a lot of information, but this is just initial information. And as we go through these slides, we'll also now start finding the gaps that we need to fill as we go along. Now, so on first glance, it might seem like, my God, we've done a lot of digging around. But the fact of the matter is, he does not like to speak about his family. And that has been a problem. because he does not really want to go into his relationship with his ex-wife. I mean, he's told us what the problem is. Now, we have noted down what he has told us, but I'd like you all to remember that this is his version of the story. We haven't spoken with anybody on the other side. We haven't spoken with his wife, and we haven't spoken with his children. That is not to say that we doubt what he is saying. But as clinicians, it is very important for us to understand that there's always more than one side to a story. Okay, there are three. I mean, there are three types, isn't it? There's your truth, my truth, and the real truth. So, so that's something that all of us have to be cognizant of. And but we report it as it is. And just like we take somebody's pain scale at face value, we also work with the information that they first give us. What is really coming out is that he feels quite cheated by and badly treated by the other family that he had for so long. And to me, it seemed like there's a fair bit of anger there, which is probably what is not allowing him to speak of his family much more. So we're going to leave it at the moment. And as we build rapport, hopefully he will trust us enough to tell us a little bit more about what exactly happened there. But for the time being, he is living with, or he has been living with Mrs. S for a while. Now, if you look at this, this is at least not in the setup that they live in. It's not a common living arrangement. Here you have a woman who is a widow. She's also 59, and she's living with a gentleman who does not speak with his family. So clearly, they're not going to be easily accepted by the community. And what that tells us also is that this is probably why they have a problem with the neighbors. This is probably why they don't have a lot of support, right? Because this is not an easy living arrangement or a relationship, especially at the age of 59, for anyone else to accept. Now, it seems like Mr. M he was employed. He was doing well for himself, and of course, circumstances took a turn. And then he came back, and he had a terrible sort of breakup with his own family, and we don't hear any more about them for a little while, at least. The fact that he doesn't know whether his children are married or not tells us the extent to which he is estranged. Now, that is a thought that I would personally park separately. Because no matter what the estrangement is, that is something that as we develop a better sort of rapport with him, we would like to understand whether he wants to actually repair that equation with his children, at least, or not. Now, again, this is where I would exercise caution also, because that is something we think he would want. He may not want it, but that is something we should explore and respect. And as things evolve, we will work with whatever we need to do in order for him to have what he thinks he needs for his well-being. Now, we also notice that the property on which Mr. M and Mrs. S now live belongs to Mrs. S's oldest son, who lives in Dubai. I understand from what Sanu has said that just because he's living there, just because they're living there, doesn't mean that it's a good relationship. It's just that he doesn't have use for that property at the moment, and he doesn't really talk to them or anything, but he allows them to live there. Now, being 59-year-olds and not a good relationship with the son, living on his property, there would also be the fear that what happens if he decides to come back, right? Do they get to continue to live there? We don't know. We don't know enough. And at some point, perhaps it would be, if it's appropriate, we would probably try and initiate a conversation with the son to find out whether this is going to be something that's going to be a problem as we go down the line. Next slide, please. While assessing a family, it's very important to assess the dynamics between them. Now, in this case, it's just the two of them living together rather. Everybody else is away. Now, had this been a larger family, had this been a joint family, then of course this family dynamics slide would go on for like at least 2 or 3 slides, because there'd be a lot of dynamics at play. But here, because it's just 2 people, it's a much shorter bit of information. So cohesion means how well do you get along? And clearly there is a very strong bond between Mr. M and Mrs. S. in spite of, social objection to them living together, they're very bonded to one another and they continue to live together. There's a deep trust between the two of them. But there is no cohesion with any other family member. They don't get along with anybody else. Okay, and that must be a very isolating experience. So they have each other, but they have only each other. There's nobody else, which also sort of makes things a little bit more complicated and involved. I mean, if something were to happen to one of them, then the other one would have a very, very hard time of it. Okay, in terms of communication, who's talking to whom and how are they talking? The communication is strictly between the two of them. They're not talking to anybody else. Again, that's a problem. That means, that indicates there's no social support outside of their immediate relationship with one another. All of us fulfill roles in our families and in our communities. And these roles are important because, they pretty much define how we spend our time, who we talk to and how we talk to them, how much power we hold in the family. And in this case, it seems as though Mr. M and Mrs. S have a very reciprocal caregiving relationship. Now, she, like it says somewhere down the line that, right here, she's getting increasingly forgetful. And that is a concern he raised. Okay, and he's afraid to leave her alone. So who is whose caregiver really? So who's the patient and who's the caregiver? They both play both parts. And the fact that there is no third person in the picture makes it, again, a vulnerable equation. They are deeply enmeshed. The term enmeshed means to be completely entangled with each other. And that further isolates them from the rest of their respective families and the community. So while it's great that they have this very special bond, it also, I suppose, prevents them from creating any other bonds outside. So that is something that, again, we need to park aside. Adaptability really tells us what is the family's ability to adapt to its circumstances. As things change, how do they adapt to it? And in this case, clearly adaptability is low for several reasons. They don't have an income. They don't have any other social support. They don't have many choices. They're not self-reliant. So they rely on, I think his siblings occasionally give them some money and all of that. But apart from that, they don't have a steady income. So they are not left with very many choices to adapt in case the situation changes drastically. So adaptability is low. And in terms of decision making, it appears that Mr. M is the primary decision maker. This could have to do with the fact that she's a little bit forgetful nowadays, and increasingly forgetting things and not remembering them and so on. So he's probably taken on the role of being the decision maker. Now, who makes decisions in a family is very important for us to know, because you might think when somebody comes to you that the caregiver, the primary caregiver who is bringing the patient to you, is the one you talk to and you explain things to, and then your job is done. But that person may not actually be the decision maker. The family could have a second cousin or an uncle who lives in the Middle East and is the earning member of the family and pays for the procedures and the treatments and everything else and the rent for the patient and the caregiver back home. And ultimately, usually, the person who controls the finances is the one who makes the decisions. That is a dynamic that is pretty universal. And so the caregiver who is there day in, day out, looking after the patient, may actually not hold the power to make some critical decisions. That decision will happen with somebody who at first glance is not even on the ground in the picture in front of you. So when exploring dynamics in a family, I will encourage you to find out who is financially responsible for the family, and that will tell you what the power dynamics of the family really are. Okay, so these are some of the vital parameters along which we understand family dynamics. And next slide, please. Okay. As you can see, we go into fairly detailed note-taking of the family and of the people that that surround them. And we like to break it up into the challenges. It's not just what is happening socially, what's challenging and what is positive. So both. We examine both sides. The social challenges that this couple is facing is that they don't have any social support, which is obvious. And they report that the community feels Mrs. S is of an immoral background. Now, we don't know exactly what they mean by that. This is something that Mr. M has told us. Okay, we will probably get to know a little bit more about the community as we go along. Maybe speak to a few neighbors, really understand from them if this is how they really feel, and if this is a stigmatized relationship from that perspective. Probably psychoeducate them a little bit about about just relationships, human relationships, and how important it is, especially as people are getting older, to support them as a community and so on and so forth. What is becoming quite obvious from this case is that there are several things working against them. One is that they're also aging quite. They're 59. They're going to be 60. Both of them are going to be 60 next year. Mr. M is already. He needs help with being mobile. She is becoming increasingly forgetful. So there's a lot of things that are now starting to go even increasingly wrong. And in the absence of any social support, this is only going to be a compounded problem. Okay, like Sanu said, there's an ongoing conflict of interest with the local panchayat over the expansion of a public road, and also they're not getting any help, even though the house is in a state of complete disrepair. In fact, we had to give them. We had to buy them a tarpaulin sheet and quickly do some patchwork on their roof and stuff before the monsoon really did them any harm. So there's a lot of issues going on there also. But let's not ever discount what is available as a positive, because once we identify strengths, we can build on those strengths. Quite often it's very easy for us to sort of just focus on the negatives and try and problem solve there, but sometimes just looking at what is actually already working for them and strengthening that might be a good place to start. So the social support available is that, even though sporadically and intermittently, it seems that Mr. M's siblings do reach out. Now, our next line of business then would be to find out where exactly these siblings are. How far away are they physically? What are the different kinds of relationships that he shares with each of the siblings? The fact that they're willing, and they're all women, mind you, they're all women. They're sending him money from time to time. So we will probably need to explore if we can strengthen that side of his family relationships a little bit better. Of course, they receive a food kit from us along with free medicines. But I'm going to ask you to think about the fact that is it enough that they're getting free medicines, and if they're getting a food kit? Because if they are caregivers to one another, he's not very mobile. She's the one who's sort of looking after him on that front, but she's forgetting. Adherence to a medical schedule might be a problem. Are they taking their medication at the right dose at the right time? Who's looking into that? Right? If he needs physiotherapy, how is he doing it? So yes, our home care team goes in and all of that, but how do we make sure that there is compliance and adherence to the medical routine? Now, this is where a volunteer becomes absolutely invaluable to us, because because of limited resources and infrastructure, we can probably see this family once a week, once in 2 weeks perhaps. But that is really not enough for a couple that is in this condition. They need to have people coming across more often. Now, this is not only to make sure that they're taking their medicines and they have something to eat, but it's also companionship. It's to offer companionship, and it's to let them know that they're not alone and people care about them, which is as important. I mean, human connection is as important, if not more, in some of these cases. We have an increasingly aging population in India. And in Kerala alone, I think in 2014, there's a study which said that 173,000 people, elderly, were living alone, out of which 120 something were women. And these are things that we need to be, aware of, because they are being marginalized. And this is a couple that is already marginalized. They're already isolated, and they're pretty high risk for more complications to come in. Next slide, please. A quick overview of their financial condition. Of course, we've gone through it. Now, again, they haven't told us who they owe this money to. They might be ashamed. They might be embarrassed. You know, people who have, and considering that this man earned 40,000 rupees a month, was able to look after his siblings. I mean, there is a sense of dignity attached to this that we must not forget. And, you know, when somebody is so deep in debt and not doing well and his whole life seems to have seemingly fallen apart, this is again a topic that is a bit touchy for people. And, but we need to know so that we can help them come out of that financial crisis if we can. But that is again something that we're going to have to build a bond with them so that they can be a little bit more open about what exactly this loan is and what debt they're in. We, as a team, we need to look into the schemes and subsidies that are available to people like them and help them access it. So that is something that is obviously still pending from our side, but that's obviously going to be in our plan of care. Schemes and subsidies that they have already accessed, not much. They've only accessed the widow's pension, and so that is their income. That and the intermittent help from his siblings. So really not much at all. This is self-explanatory, so we can move on to the next slide, please. Why is it important to understand a patient and a caregiver's insight into the illness? It's very important to understand what they think about their condition. Whether they understand what the diagnosis means, what are the implications on lifestyle, what they need to do in order to maintain a particular level of health. If they've been misinformed or they haven't been given adequate information. And it wouldn't be right for us to walk in there and assume that the patient knows his or her diagnosis or what it means. And this is where, you know, we get into the complicated area of collusion, where the caregiver might tell the healthcare professionals, listen, he doesn't know his diagnosis, let's not talk about it. We don't want to strip him of hope. Now, in this case, he does not have something like a terminal cancer, you know, so it's, I mean, not that there's a comparison between the two, but in some cases, of course, there's an urgency to understand. So it's always important that we, as clinicians, as psychosocial clinicians, ask them open-ended questions, ask them what they understand of the illness. And then this is what we got, that he does understand his diagnosis and implications. He knows what he has to do. And that makes things a little bit simpler. It's also important to understand what the caregiver understands of the illness. 80% of caregivers worldwide are women. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because in our culture especially, very often people will not talk to the woman. They will talk to a man who is accompanying the patient. A lot of women don't ask questions. There is patriarchy. That's something that we can't ignore. That's the elephant in the room, and it's very visible. So the other part of that statistic is that 80% of caregivers worldwide are women. Men access healthcare more than women do. And when women do access healthcare, they are denied healthcare more than men are denied healthcare for various reasons. Okay. A woman is also expected to bear it. You know, if she has a cold or a slight headache or a fever, she still continues to do what she has to do around the house. She's still maintaining things around the house. She still has to be a mother. She still has to cook. She has to do all those things. Now, I know I'm really sort of laying it on thick, the gender roles, but that is how a large majority of our population lives. And let's not ignore that. We can't wish it away. And with all of these different dynamics in play, people talk over the woman or past her, or they don't give her the information. And then she's left looking after a patient who she doesn't really know the whole picture about. And this has happened in several cases where a patient has been released from a hospital with a feeding tube. And all the woman thinks she has to do then is, you know, and we like to feed people. I mean, all of us do. And especially when someone is sick, we like to feed them even more. But then has anybody explained to her why exactly that particular, feeding tube is there. How does she have to feed? What does she have to watch out for? All of those things. Those conversations rarely happen. So understanding what the caregiver, and I just also want to say that, this also applies to male caregivers. It's not necessarily that this only happens to women, but largely it happens to women. So it's very important to understand from the caregiver what they understand of the situation. And you might be surprised of what they, with what they tell you. So, and then we have to work with that. Yeah, next slide, please. We've done a mental status examination. I'm not going to go through it again because Sanu has explained it quite well. But what is missing here? What is missing on the slide? We haven't done a mental status examination of the caregiver. Which, given the particular dynamics of this case, is absolutely essential. So that is something. This could very well have been because of a lack of time. All of you who run home care teams and services, you understand that time is, it's a huge, it's a luxury. And so probably because Mr. M was the patient on record for us, a mental status examination was done for him. And probably I expect that a mental status examination will be done for the caregiver the next time around. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all this in much detail, like I said. What we have decided is yes, we will need to check on Mrs. S. Next slide, please. Okay, so Sanu, if you don't mind, I will, just being mindful of time, I'm going to go through this slide with everybody. Yeah. Having gone through the history, now these are the concerns that need attention. Strained and hostile relationships with respect to families is pretty obvious. The family lacks community support due to their perceived unhealthy background, perceived by the community. Take it a step back. Mr. M also thinks that the community thinks this of them. There's two levels there. So one is what he thinks the community thinks of them. One is what the community thinks of them. And one is what we need to find out what is really going on. Okay, so sometimes if we feel that someone has a bad opinion of us, we also don't make the effort to reach out, right? So that's where a little bit of facilitation is needed by us as clinicians. Okay, so this is not an assumption we're making. This is what has been reported, but we need to explore it. Since they don't own the property, they can't avail funds under the Life Project scheme. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very basic level, in order to feel secure, you need shelter, you need food, you need sustenance. Okay. Now, if they don't have that, if they're not secure in that knowledge, that is actually going to be a very shaky foundation for anything else to happen. And we all know, I mean, we don't have to be 59 years old or older or whatever. The best of us, the best of health, if we're not sure about our living condition, then everything else becomes stressful. So that is something that we need to look into and probably facilitate with the panchayat. Like I said, no ownership of the house and a strained relationship with the son also results in insecurity there. So that is something that needs to be addressed with the son to find out if he were to return to India, where does that leave this old couple? And depending on what he tells us, we're probably going to have to make preparations. No income except widow's pension and sporadic contribution. And Mrs. S's increasing forgetfulness and increasing age of both people involved. Okay. So these are the major concerns. Obviously, there's a plethora of smaller concerns, but we haven't listed all of them down. Next slide, please. So far, this is what we have been able to do as a quick fix. Okay, there was a proper assessment done in terms of just understanding where they are in terms of socio-demographics and stuff like that. But obviously, we need to dig a lot deeper, and that can only happen after we build better rapport with them. Fixed up a makeshift tarpaulin roof to protect against the rain. That is something that we could immediately do as first aid, so to speak. frequent phone follow-ups to establish a more meaningful relationship. Like I said, they are getting older, they're alone, and sometimes we feel like, okay, if we can't visit them every week, we're not doing enough. But just calling them and having a chat, making sure that even when we are not physically present in front of them, we care enough about them to call them and just find out how they're doing. If there's been a heavy rain, call them and ask them, are you all right? Is that tarpaulin held up? Is there anything we can do? So those kind of things have been happening on a regular basis. And of course, the team ensured that they go and get a checkup done at the government hospital. And that is something that they will probably do quite frequently with them. Made sure that the food kit reaches them so that they don't go hungry. And because of Mrs. S's increasing forgetfulness, as a team, we felt that it's best that she's also assessed by a specialist mental health team. We have a special mental health team that goes out once a week. And we have a senior psychiatrist, some of you know her, Dr. Chitra Venkatesh. She comes down once a month and she leads the team, and she visits all these people, and she takes care of their psychiatric medication and so on and so forth. So we've actually listed Mrs. S down to be assessed by Chitra to make sure that it's not dementia or something else setting in. And if there is, then we need to do something about that as well. So that was done, and so I think Chitra is coming down in July now, and she will be visiting this couple to see what exactly is going on with Mrs. S. Okay, next slide, please. So we've looked at their history, we looked at their current status, we've looked at their dynamics with the community, with their family, their financial status, to some extent their emotional status, but obviously we need to explore that a little bit more. We've identified the major challenges, the major concerns, and based on that, we are starting to now create a roadmap. What should be the goals of the psychosocial team? One, of course, is to address the basic fundamental needs: food, shelter, medicines. We have to continually build our rapport, constantly. Here are two people who've really gone through quite a bit in life. We don't know what the real story is. We don't know what has brought them to this point in their lives. He seemed to have been doing well for a large part of his life. And we don't really know too much about her history, how they met, when they got together, all of that. And while some of those details may not be very important to our plan of care, knowing somebody's story and journey, of course, is a meaningful exercise. So in order to get there, of course, we have to continually build that trust. We need to get them to trust us. We need to honor the information that they give us. If there's something they're not ready to share with us, it's okay. We don't have to extricate it out of them. We need to give them the time and space to really let us into their lives. More practical goal is to mediate with the panchayat in addressing their need for shelter. So a team from Pallium will be doing that, and we'll be having a chat with some of the locals there, the panchayat people there, to find out what can be done. If this road is going to be expanded, then what are the other alternative solutions for people like Mr. M and Mrs. S? Strengthen the coping mechanism by enabling social support. Now, this is a rather vague sentence. It sounds great, it sounds right, but to really be able to enable social support, we're going to have to get into that community and find out how this can be done. The simplest thing would be for us to mobilize more volunteers to visit the couple on a regular basis. They don't necessarily have to live in the neighborhood. They could be somewhere nearby, but to make sure that there is more than one volunteer, because that one volunteer may have several other things that he or she is doing. So to make sure that there's no gap in that providing of companionship, in providing support, to mobilize more volunteers to visit this couple. And of course, to facilitate access to existing schemes and subsidies, which they haven't done for themselves yet. Obviously, because the two of them are alone, and Mr. M is not being able to move around too much on his own, and he's also worried about letting her go. Remember, he said that he's afraid to leave her alone because she forgets. He's worried that she might forget her way home. He's worried that she might not be able to find her way somewhere. So it makes it very difficult for the two of them to then go to government offices, get access to the subsidies and so on. So that's where we will step in, and we'll make sure that gets done for them. Next slide, please. So now it's almost 4 o'clock, and I'm sure that a lot of you have questions and a lot to say, but here are some basic discussion points that I would like to put to all of you. And if we could start if we could have these points as discussion points, I'd love to hear from all of you what your thoughts are. Okay, so we're also looking to find solutions. I know a lot of you have done a lot of really great work where you are. So by no means are we the complete experts on this. We're probably not seeing something that you might be able to point us in the direction of. So if you'd like to say something, please do raise your hand. And so the first question here is, who is the patient and who is the caregiver?
Yeah, as usual procedure, if you have any comments and any questions, please raise your hands so that we can point out whom it is. And Smriti ma'am, I think, yeah, Divya Mohan has a question. Is it?
Hello. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes. Please proceed.
Ma'am, I think here both are like mutually they are patients, because the lady's been forgetful about her things, and definitely that Mr. M is patient. And I think the guy cares for her, and that lady cares for him as well. And it's been a mutual role for them, I believe. So both are patients at times and both are caregivers at times.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, and that's something that, it's become quite clear that because this is a fluid role that the two of them keep interchanging.
Exactly.
And they're codependent on one another.
Yes.
They're heavily dependent on one another. And there is no real, typically we see a caregiver who's able-bodied and who's running around doing all the work. We don't have that person here. So this is a reciprocal relationship of a patient and a caregiver. And I mean, because it's interconnected, I am going to bring up the next point: the invisible patient in every family. We as psychosocial clinicians, I think, actually everybody on the team, I don't know why I'm singling the non-medical fraternity out, but everybody who's on the interdisciplinary team, I think it's so important for us to look past the patient and see who else is around them. You will find that there's always an invisible patient in a family. Sometimes it's if it's a child who is sick, it is a sibling of the child. Sometimes it's the daughter-in-law, the one who's expected to drop everything that she's been doing, stay at home and look after the sick patient.
Yes, correct.
And we once went on a home care visit, and there was this elderly lady who had terrible bed sores. She hadn't been attended to, and she was in so much pain that she couldn't even have a cloth over her. And she was in so much agony that she was spewing abusive language. I mean, I don't even understand Malayalam, but I understood the tone enough for my toes to curl a little bit. But there she was, lying on her bed, having lost bowel control. And the only person who was left to look after her at home was her daughter-in-law. And this is a daughter-in-law who's not been married into that family very long. It's probably an arranged marriage. It's not like looking after your parents, right? You're looking after somebody who you've met recently, who you've met for the first time. And this is a terrible condition that they're in. And she had to constantly clean her mother-in-law up. And, had to clean up all the fecal waste, clean up her body, whatever, everything, and all the while being yelled at. And the poor old woman probably couldn't help it because she was in so much agony. But then, as the team went in to look after the main patient, we noticed that the daughter-in-law had these fungating wounds between her hands, between her fingers. And when we checked, they were pretty bad. And then when we asked her what was going on, it turns out that she had almost developed an OCD because she was constantly cleaning up her mother-in-law. She started washing her hands
very frequently,
and frequently to the extent where she's lost count of how many times a day she would wash her hands, and her hands were never dry. So anyway, simple thing was to give her medicine as well, to put some ointment and all of that, and then to give her surgical gloves that she could use every time she needed to do this for her mother-in-law. But very clearly in this case, the daughter-in-law was an invisible patient. and was being completely sidelined by everybody. So my request to everyone here is look out for that invisible patient. It could be anybody. It could be anyone.
We never thought of this, ma'am. That the concept of invisible patient. We used to counsel them, I mean, the main caregiver, but as you said, we used to miss out, I think.
You'll often find also that if there's somebody sick in the house and if there's a young child or a teenager or whatever, teenagers are anyway going through their hormonal issues and, you know, growing up and individuating and all of that. But you have someone sick in the house, look out for behavioral issues with that, with an adolescent. Look out for that, because if that is not immediately addressed while the patient and the caregiver are being looked at, that could also compound into another issue later in life. So so that is something to look into. We say in palliative care that we look
Smriti ma'am?
Yeah.
She's back.
Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So any more comments from anybody else?
Yeah, thank you, Divya, for your healthy conversation. Pranab Kumar sir, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, the critical case studies narrated by Madam Rana, SMRITI Rana. So, one question is the role of caregiver is very, very tough in this case, because the relationship between husband and wife, if not smooth, then the role of caregiver becomes very difficult, because no coordination from the patient will be available. So in this case, as a social worker, as a community group, as a social supporting group, should we visit frequently to the home and counsel the family members to accept the reality and about the disease, recovery of the disease, isn't it? So far, I believe.
In this particular case, sir, are you talking about the couple that's living together, or are you talking about his ex-wife who's estranged?
No, couple living together.
In this case, the two of them actually care about each other a lot. They care about each other a lot.
Then
there's not too much strain between them in an interpersonal.
Then it is not difficult for the caregiver, because the cooperation will be given by the patient, and but social isolation.
Yes.
Regarding social isolation, what should we do in this social isolation case, as a social worker, as a supporting group?
I'd actually really love to hear other people's ideas about this. I mean, we've sort of listed out what we think the areas should be, but I'd really like to hear from some of the other people present today what you think we could do as initiatives to engage them more with their social support structure. I know CCF does a lot of work on the field like that. Recently, you've had a wonderful success with just such a lady. So I'm going to put the spotlight on CCF to tell us a little bit. Hello, Dr. Balaji.
Hi.
Hi, doctor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Please, sir.
Actually, it's quite interesting. Unfortunately, Harsha is not here. And what happened is, when they were told by somebody that there's this elderly lady, terminal cancer, she's having hematemesis and melena in the stools, abandoned by the family. The opposite house people have locked the house and gone away. Nobody to look after her at all. Our team has gone in, tried their best to do something, cleaned her up, gave her a sponge bath, cleaned up the entire house. And when they were coming out with all the rubbish to discard, The neighbors saw to it that they didn't discard it anywhere in the village. They brought it back to our office and discarded it here. There was absolutely nothing forthcoming from the neighbors. There was no caretakers in the house either. They didn't do anything to antagonize everyone. They just came away. They talked to them and found that they felt that they would all get infected, including the children. The next day, when they went back, within 48 hours, when they went back, the neighbors were all there to help them, brought them clean clothes and things to share with the patient. They gave them a chance to sit, and they all wanted to listen and understand what was going on in this patient's house and offered to try and get us something to eat. Each person in the village, sort of in the street, organized, somebody will bring them lunch, somebody will bring dinner, somebody will look after, and they all put on gloves, masks, and came into the house to help clean. My team actually did not confront the neighbors. They just accepted the reluctance of them to help, reached out in their own way, and what we expected was this. Today, I think they went again and were received with quite a lot of enthusiasm. So I think it's just that it takes time, but in this case, a very, very short time. I think it made them feel guilty or take ownership of their own neighbor when an outsider has come to give so much care. So I think you just do your work. Don't be judgmental. Don't criticize or comment about somebody. Each one has a reason for the way they behave. Accept it, move along, and then things will fall in place. I mean, we are learning on the job, but it's quite an eye-opener. Okay,
Sir, big applause from our side.
Thank you. Then, actually, it's all a question of commitment and selfless work without hesitation, which I think hats off to my team. The amazing teamwork.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I just want to add to that, Dr. Balaji, that what your team really did there was led by example, and I think that's such an important thing for us to remember, that we're not there in a manner to make somebody's life better, from a paternalistic point of view. I mean, I'm going to actually tell you all one of my favorite quotes, and it's from this lady called Pema Chodron, and she says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. And we as, I think, clinicians need to remember that we're just other human beings trying to help someone out. And when we go in there and we demonstrate that compassion, then it triggers, like in the case of the CCF team, I think it triggered compassion in the neighbors as well. And so leading by example is so important, and putting aside our own judgments. Now, the other thing in that, I would say in this particular case, is to not work within the assumptions that Mr. M or Mrs. S have given us. There is a lot of assumption there. And if we keep ourselves within that assumption, then the solutions are also sort of just there. But maybe as we sort of, develop a relationship with the community, we should actually cross-check whether any of these assumptions are completely true or not. And so that's also something that we need to mediate and facilitate from time to time. Any other comments and thoughts? Any questions?
Sorry, no, sir.
Okay, so then let's talk about how do we strengthen social support. I think Dr. Balaji just also gave us quite an incredible example of that. How do we address the family hostilities? Now, first we need to also, I think, explore how much do they want to mend those bridges. Oftentimes, we also make these assumptions that, the best thing for a person is to be able to mend bridges with people that they have fought with and so on and so forth. But unless we know what they want, we shouldn't be making that decision at all. I'm sometimes asked, okay, but what about this? How do we break this collusion? How do we break this denial? That's what we think we should be doing. But is that what the family wants? Is that what the family requires in that moment? Are we jumping the gun there? That is something that we need to also think about. And if we have to make peace with the fact that Mr. M may never want to speak to his daughters again. That's maybe not what you and I might want if we were in that position. But if that's what he comes up with in the course of our relationship with him, then we're going to have to respect that as well. Sorry. Now, in the event that one of them is left alone, what would be other options for providing care for the remaining person in this dynamic? I'd like to hear from some of you what you think. What are some of the systems we should be putting in place here in case something happens to either of them? What are the possibilities that we should be exploring? Because this is not something we should put away till the crisis is upon us. It's probably we should have some sort of a plan of action in case that day comes. So, Dr. Balaji, do you have something to say?
I don't mean to monopolize the discussion. I just want to share with you the experienced same lady. When they came back after the first visit, we were looking at how we can help and do something where she was abandoned. And strangely, we found that in the government hospital in Coimbatore, there's a ward which is called the unwanted ward. Can you believe that having a ward called the unwanted ward? And there is a person who coordinates and accepts people who have been abandoned on the roadside, who are picked up and taken to that place and looked after. So actually there are resources. We have to explore them and find them. And that was just by networking and putting it on a WhatsApp group, we found that such a thing exists. So I think when you reach out and look for help, don't be ashamed to ask for help. Reach out to whoever you can in whatever way you can. Social media is extremely strong here, and put it into groups. And you'll be surprised the amount of resources available which can be shared, and you can partner with people to achieve a lot more than you can if you are alone.
Thank you. I'm horrified by that name, by the way. I don't know if we want to put somebody in the unwanted ward, but yes, that we have to I think also list out different options that are available to us, especially when it comes down to somebody who's abandoned and elderly and does not really have anybody else to look after them. It would bode well for us all to have at least a directory of potential resources, other agencies, non-palliative care people who are doing work. It's so important for us to develop cross-sector alliances within public health. You know, we sometimes take it upon ourselves to try and solve every single problem. But recently, we started an exercise also in Pallium India where we have a law intern, someone who's studying law. And one of the things that she's doing with us is actually exploring different aspects of women's rights, children's rights. What happens when there's domestic abuse? What happens when there's sexual abuse? Things like that, so that we as a team also know where we can, how far we can extend ourselves. What is a line we cannot cross? Where can we get help? So we need to educate ourselves, but make those alliances. Have somebody from the legal field who you can refer to on a regular basis, especially when it comes to situations like these. Because as a palliative care team, we're looking at various things that are happening. We come across all kinds of issues that people are facing in their lives. We're not there only to look after the person who is sick. We're also, if you find that something else is going on, we should be able to help that person, because that is part of the family's suffering. So make your cross-sector alliances, look beyond the palliative care field, look beyond the medical field, and have those resource people handy, so that when something like this happens, you know who to reach out to. So we don't have a lot more time left. So I just wanted to say one thing before I stop talking and just ask for all your closing comments. The reason we took you through this particular case from start to finish is also to demonstrate the depth of information we were able to get in just a couple of assessment meetings. And, when I first started out, I think a psychosocial assessment just meant financial. It meant what the family setup is. We hardly ever looked into dynamics. We hardly looked into some of these other aspects. But I think it is so critical for us to actually go into as much depth as possible, because somewhere in all of this lies some of the solutions to this family's problems. Now, as we go along over the course of the next as many sessions as are left in this particular echo series, we will be looking at various different cases in depth. And I trust that when people present cases, especially from the psychosocial point of view, that you will try and assess them on all these different parameters, that these are all different kinds of information that you will bring to the table when you want us to discuss a case. So that's a request I'm going to make to anybody who's looking forward to presenting a case during the echo sessions. Raju and Vaishnavi, I'm going to I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, I think Sanu wants to add one more point to the presentation. So Sanu, please.
Yeah, I would like to say some of the schemes that are available in the national level also. Also in Kerala, we have got other schemes like Karunya scheme, which is extremely for the cancer patients. They get receive cancer pensions. But then in the national level, we could facilitate the patients to avail the services of Prime Minister's Fund, as well as we have got the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, wherein like the patients who wants fund for kidney dialysis, then heart patients, diabetic patients, all of them could receive fund from Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, wherein 75% of the fund, it comes from the central government, and rest is 25% comes from the state government. And then in Kerala, we have got this Chief Minister's Relief Fund, like recently after the flood, whereas in the national level, it is all about the RSBY. Then we have got a Prime Minister's Fund, wherein all the hospital bills could be reimbursed through this scheme. Yeah, and this patient, since they belong to below poverty line, they also receive ration services. So I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanu. That is so important what you raised. So Raju and Vaishnavi, I'm going to actually make a suggestion to this group of participants. Why don't we, come up with a directory where all of us can populate it with the different schemes that all of us are aware of? Because we part of the reason we are having the psychosocial echo for all of us is that we can also come together to share knowledge, to share solutions, to share tools. So if I may suggest that as part of an outcome of all of us coming together, we create some sort of a Google Drive where we create a sheet, and all of us who have information about different things that are available across different states. I mean, I would love to know what is available in Orissa or in Meghalaya or in Tamil Nadu. I mean, just because we're in Kerala doesn't mean that we shouldn't know what's going on there. And if cases are referred to us, then this is a database that all of us can sort of learn from. And so I'm going to request everybody here to once that is shared, to please populate it with whatever information you have, and let's all help each other out.
Wonderful idea, ma'am. Very healthy point. That is actually the schemes which Sanu mentioned. We will send you the link along with the presentations, the learning summary notes, so that you can go through the central government schemes, and each state government has different schemes for this, especially regarding health, as well as another set of social issues. So each state government as well as central government have different schemes and policies, so that we all can have a search on it, and we can collect it in our Google Drive, so that everyone can reach out to different points. So yeah, anything else?
Like in some cases, these stroke patients, they could receive disability pension also, but then that depends upon the disability percentage, and the doctor will have to certify it. There are some patients where we have seen stroke patients who have been receiving a disability pension, but then that depends upon the percentage of disability actually.
Yes, elderly, women, children, disability, and palliative care schemes. All those are comes across this particular point. So we can have a study on it and we will discuss it as a, maybe if you all agree, we will have a separate, some particular session for that. Is that okay, ma'am? Like discussing the points. Yeah. So is there any more suggestions and comments from the participants? If yes, Bashisha, please.
Ma'am, your headphones are not working, I think. We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, ma'am, mic closer to your mouth.
Hello,
A bit
can
louder.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. No, actually, I'm saying like in our hospital in Negrams, we have this scheme called the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi scheme. I don't know like how many of you like are availing like for our patients, but like what we've been doing is for our patient, like we've been doing this scheme called the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi scheme. It's a centrally sponsored scheme. So under this scheme, each patient can avail up to 5 lakhs of amount, be it cancer or any terminal illness. So like this is one of the schemes that we are been using here in Negrams, and another is the Health Minister's discretionary grant, and we also have our state scheme called the Meghalaya Health Insurance Scheme. So like these are some of the schemes that we refer to our patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Bashisha, for sharing that. So, anything? If no further comments, we are going to the closing part of the session. So, I think this is yet another insightful session, and especially dealing and describing a personal life experience through a case history while understanding a person's socio-mental assessment in a detailed way. So thank you so much, Smriti ma'am and Sanu, for this very effective presentation. We are looking more from you on next session. So for all the team members, I would like to inform you that this is the case presentation pattern which we follow. So in future, your presentations also, please follow the patterns. Now we will share the patterns and we will share the screen and summary points and along with the links. So just go through the patterns, and so that when you prepare your own case presentations, you will get more idea about how we need to present the case. So that's all, and thank you so much one and all. We will see you in the next session. Yeah, over to Raj.
So I have been sending the learning materials of past 2 sessions. I hope all have received it. If not, please notify me. Maybe there might be some change in your email ID. That is why we couldn't reach you. So please notify me with that. And whenever you log in, please give your name. So we can see a name Lenovo tab 410 here. So if your name is there, we can mark your attendance. Otherwise, we will lose you. So please give your name while logging in. So we can see you on
Next Friday.
we can see you on next Friday with topic communication taken by Dr. Biju Raghavan sir. So any doubt, any queries, please write to us. Till then, goodbye.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.